morning try to move this along and maybe get a kind of consensus. There's no closure, but maybe consensus. And then we'll talk together and answer questions. We're sort of over the hump here this morning. The general layout of the thing is now clear. The idea is that you should now begin to self-direct it so you get input on whatever issues are outstanding for you in all of this. I thought this morning I would just talk a little bit about my view of time and the planetary crisis, the historical crisis, and relate all this back to the ecological crisis. Someone in fact this morning asked me about what did I think about the large number of occult prophecies about the approach of some great phase transition in the life of humanity. Either we are about to experience the glory or be contacted by benevolent extraterrestrials, or the coming of the Buddha Maitreya is hailed as just around the corner. Well, rationalism just rejects all this stuff as the fantasy of a paranoid streak in the collective imagination. But it's interesting how many psychedelic travelers return with maps that suggest that there is some immense perturbation ahead of us in time. And since my whole shtick is about stressing the primacy of experience, the primacy of intuition, I think we have to at least take seriously as phenomenologists this testimony, this persistent intuition of an approaching transform. On one level, it doesn't appear irrational at all, because we can look around us in the world and see the acceleration of all kinds of tendencies. The rising density of population, the rising strain on the availability of minerals and petrochemical fuels and this sort of thing, the increasing density of electromagnetic radiation from human-generated sources, the increasing density of mutagens in the environment, the increasing availability of information of all sorts on all topics, the factor that I indicated yesterday as being behind the psychedelic revolution. Well, what are we to make of this process of intensification, coalescence, concrescence, knitting together that seems to characterize both the natural and the human world? It obviously cannot be propagated infinitely into the future before all these factors become asymptotic and can't be imaged anymore. I mean, at the rate at which we are releasing energy and accelerating availability of information, these things will become infinite sometime after the turn of the century. Well, what does that mean, and why does the intuition of it so haunt the fantasy of Western religion and the psychedelic experience? And to answer this question, I have sort of had to, I don't know whether I underwent a conversion away from rationalism or a reconversion back to scholasticism. But, keep your eyes open on this one, because I may be leading you down the primrose path. Nevertheless, it seems to me what we need is a 12-gauge shotgun. No, I'm kidding. My friend Ralph Abraham is a proponent of this school of mathematics called chaotic attractors or dynamics. And this is the notion that many processes are not pushed from behind by the momentum of casuistry, as in the ordinary Newtonian model of process, but that there are what he calls attractors, or basins of attraction. And these are things which lead processes forward. For instance, a somewhat trivial example would be if we had a large bowl and a marble, and every time we released the marble up near the rim of the bowl, we would notice that it unfailingly rolled to the bottom of the bowl and located itself somewhere near the center of the bottom of the bowl. We could say that the bottom of the bowl acts as a basin of attraction for the marble. In other words, the marble finds its most that its energy state is most at equilibrium when it locates itself in the trough of the bowl. So there is a way of analyzing processes to see them as though they were led rather than pushed. And I think it's fruitful to see human history this way. You see, what we deny as a culture of materialist, positivist reductionists, is the presence of spirit in the world, in ourselves, or in nature. And so Western science is very concerned to deny what is called telos. Telos is a Greek term for purpose. Purpose. The same idea as the attractor that I was trying. If you have a target, if you're driving a car toward a goal, the goal is your telos. It decides how you will steer the car. Well, it has been for the past 150 years extremely fashionable in sociology and biology because of Darwin to deny telos in nature, to say that, any apparent order in nature is made up of the disorder of random mutation meeting the disorder of natural selective processes, and these two streams of converging disorder create a kind of apparent or virtual order, which is an illusion. This is the orthodox theory. And when you take this Darwinism and put it into historical theory of human processes in time, you get the modern position in academic philosophy about history, which is that it is, and the official phrase is, trendlessly fluctuating. That's what we are asked to believe we are embedded in, a 10,000-year-old process of trendless fluctuation. In mathematics, this is called a random walk. It means you just go over here a few steps, and then you go this way, and then you go back. You're like a drunk, lurching around in this phase space. And this is the highest vision of human purpose that the reductionist vision can offer. Well, what the intuition of religion is, especially Western religion, and I wouldn't even bother to mention it, except that it also is the strong intuition of a lot of psychedelic experience, that there is some kind of attractor in the historical phase space. There is something which is drawing everything toward it. It's like a higher dimensional entity that casts an enormous shadow over the human landscape. So that, at sitting around campfires 50,000 years ago, people felt this vague tug toward organization, order, cognitive activity, epigenetic activity. Epigenetic activity means coding stuff not in your genes, but in dance, gesture, ritual, and ultimately in clay and on paper and in electronic storage methods. This proliferation of complexity is a response to and an anticipation of this transcendental object at the end of historical process. You see, if it weren't for our presence on this planet, even modern science at its present primitive state could give a fairly good accounting of what's going on, that out of complex polymers arose super complex polymers which were self-replicating, and that was life, and then you have an animal population. But the fly in the ointment of this rational model of reality is ourselves. We are clearly imbued with a higher dimension, which we call spirit, in a way that ordinary matter, when imbued with a higher dimension, is called life. In other words, we represent a different ontological level in the career of organization, because we hope, we despair, we plan, we remember, and we misremember. You know, we lie, we fabricate, we delude ourselves and other people. All of these things are uniquely human functions. Well, I think that shamanism, which is the focus of our concern here, is a kind of anticipating of the whole pattern. And that this is really the way to think about shamanism when thinking of it as a force that can steady and complete an individual human life.